Hey everybody, this is John for MTGO coming at you with another quick deck overview for the modern format. This time we are talking about Storm, but not traditional Storm, the one that's actually kind of the same play right now, and that is Twiddle Storm. If you like these informative deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, and letting us know what deck you might like to see next in the comments down below. So Twiddle Storm is a deck that's kind of existed in some form or other for a little bit. It tries to combine the various untap permanent effects, such as Twiddle, hence the name, you may tap or untap target creature, land, or artifact. Dream's Grip, which does the same thing, basically to tap and untap Lotus Field, much like Hidden Strings does in the Pioneer format, except you're just trying to do this over and over and over and over again, getting them sort of about a mana, building up a huge storm count, and hopefully grape-shotting your opponent to death. Beyond that, the deck also runs the Underworld Breach, which allows you to potentially mill out your entire deck, cast a bunch of crap from your graveyard, and then still grape-shot your opponent, making it very easy for your one grape shot to win the game. As far as finding your Lotus Field itself, you have several different ways. You have things like Otherworldly Gaze to surveil the top 3 cards of your library. So, put a bunch of cards in the graveyard looking for your key combo piece. Grim Tutor as a way to find any piece of the combo you might be missing, and the same with Wishclaw Talisman. Obviously, Talisman's a little bit risky. Generally, you only want to activate this the turn you're going off, because then if your opponent untaps, they potentially can go find a hate card and just find a way to stop what you're doing. Beyond that, obviously, deck is casting a bunch of spells. It's trying to fill up the graveyard very quickly. You use things like Mishra's Wobble and Street Wraith to shrink the size of your deck. And then you have a small amount of light protection in the form of something like Spell Pierce and Pact of Negation, protect your key combo as you're going off. Void Snare is a one-of to potentially bounce any hate pieces your opponent might have, especially in the main deck, as often in the sideboard you have access to a bunch more stuff to deal with your opponent's hate cards. That said, your deck is very much a one-trick pony, especially in the main deck. You really have to find a Lotus Field, untap it a bunch of times, cast a bunch of spells, eventually you cast an Underworld Breach, flashback in your graveyard, find your Grape Shot, kill your opponent. You take a lot of game actions, but generally, with all these tutors and everything else, you're either finding your land, twiddling your way to victory, or you're just dying. Sideboard, you have some different options. Pact of Negation as a little bit more protection along with the card Suspend. Exile target creature and put 2 time counters on it. If it doesn't gain Suspend, this is a way to get potential hate pieces off the board like Archon of Emeria or Thalia. Pithing Needle, shut down any type of problematic permanents your opponents might have, primarily Planeswalkers, things like Wrenn and 6, also potentially things like Boseiju, which could certainly give you some problems. Not necessarily with your Lotus Field, but blowing up your Underworld Breach. Beyond that, you have things like Echoing Truth to pair with your Void Snare in the main deck to deal with problematic permanents of your opponents. Leyline of Sanctity, one good way to attack you obviously being discard spells, as you're very much a one-trick pony. This protects you from your opponent being able to disrupt your strategy with Thoughtseize and company. Ivy Progenitor Ooze, this is a weird one. Storm, which so much like Grape Shot, you get a copy of it for each spell you cast. Ivy Progenitor isn't legendary if it's a token, and then it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each other ooze you control. Effectively, your Storm makes a bunch of copies of this. They come in as non-legendary, and then they get exponentially larger for each other copy that's in play. Obviously, if you're getting a Storm of 10, one ooze is coming into 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and kind of goes nuts from there. It's an alternative win con, especially if your opponent's packing something like Leyline of Sanctity on their own. Engineered Explosives, good against a lot of different things, can slow down things like Rhinos, can slow down things like Urza Saga tokens. This is primarily a way to deal with any type of hate card that might slip through the thing. Also, the one thing about IA, IV, AV, whatever it is it's also a way to get around something like Necromentia. If your opponent can't Necromentia in time to nail your Lotus Field, perhaps they try to name your win con, which is most likely going to be Grape Shot. This kind of lets you kind of diversify your threats. Once again, Leyline can also stop you if you don't find your anti-hate cards. Although, the way this deck sees cards, generally you're going to find the pieces that you're missing. There are some other different slate variations of the deck. But a lot of them are doing the same things. Obviously, I forgot to mention consider another cheap dig spell. Tome Scour is a way to mill a bunch of cards in your library into the graveyard. This allows you to kind of have fuel for your Underworld breach, kind of take care of things that way. Inquisition is a way to deal with your opponent's potential hate cards or disrupting. You may be taking a counter spell on a key turn. Amulet of Vigor is an interesting one in this build, primarily here to untap your Lotus field immediately. So maybe you can go off a turn earlier, as kind of the critical mass for this deck is like turn 3 or turn 4, because obviously you can't really go off until you have Lotus field in play, which can be a little bit tricky, as you have to have 2 other lands in play to sacrifice it, and you're not playing anything like a Boreal Grazer, kind of speed it up like the Pioneer deck does. Wishes give this variant a little bit different angle of attack. You have access to all of your sideboard in game 1. One thing I've seen with Wish decks like this, especially the Escape Ship variants, is like running a copy of Lotus Field in the sideboard. Maybe that's a way to get around some of the hate cards, like the aforementioned Necromentia, etc. As there are so many different variants of these, like take your opponent's Key Spark card out of their deck, Stonebrain, etc. Might be worth it in some sideboard games to move a Lotus Field combo deck Lotus Field to the sideboard so you don't lose access if your opponent tries to nail your Lotus Field with their Wish spells. Sideboard, obviously, you're going to see a little bit different when you have access to a Wish board. This is obviously anti-graveyard hate in the form of Tormod's Crypt, Pact of Negation for Protection, Tome Scour, we've already kind of talked about. Plays into your strategy with the Underworld Breach. Underworld Breach being in the sideboard, obviously nice. Fatal Push is ways to deal with your opponent's problematic creatures, most notably Thalia, etc. Our Echoing the Truth kind of answers everything. Mind Collapse is a weird one. It's one of the free spells. It's not that good. If it's your turn, you may sacrifice a mountain rather than pay the spell's mana cost. Mind Collapse deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker. Once again, way to answer various different hate pieces primarily, or slow your opponent's strategy down. And then IA, we've already kind of talked about, engineering explosives, etc. So, a little bit different, but in the end, your strategy is still the same. Twiddle, Dream Grip, but tap and untap your Lotus Field a bunch, gain a bunch of mana, mill through your deck, Underworld Breach, flash it all back, grape shot your opponent. Generally pretty simple. Does take a lot of game actions, takes a little bit of time off the clock, but once again, you have to find your Lotus Field, and you have to kind of go off from there. Obviously, another way to do that, Spoils the Vault. One of the nice things about this particular deck is its mana cost is extremely low, so if you're not playing against a deck that's particularly aggressive, or maybe it's turn 3, maybe you've only taken like 5 or 10 damage, you can maybe name Spoils the Vault for a Lotus Field and find it that way. So this deck does have a bunch of ways to find it. Generally, you want between 8 to 10 ways to find your Lotus Field, simply because without it, well, your deck does nothing. Finally, this version is kind of an amalgamation of the first two. You're seeing the Wish package, but you're seeing the Wish Claw Talismans and such. Mishra's Bauble still kind of along with Street Wraith as a way to thin out your deck, scry with your various fetch lands, etc. Once again, key is to find Lotus Field, play a bunch of Twiddle spells. When you find your win con, kill the opponent from there. Wish gives you access to your entire sideboard again. Obviously, this one has a lot of the same things. The one difference, notably Defense Grid, is a nice way to protect you from counter spells. Each spell costs 3 more during their controller's end step. So this is usually something more you see out of Legacy, but it is a card available in Modern you can use to kind of fight through counter spells. Force your opponent to pay a lot more for their mana, making it a little bit harder for them to fight. And obviously, Grape Shot as a win con. Brooding Saurion is an interesting one. Beginning of each end step, each player gains control of all non-token permanents they control. Main reason for this is obviously Wish Claw Talisman. If you activate it, it goes under your opponent's control. This means you have effectively a combination of Wish Claw Talisman, activate it, get it back. Your opponent never gets to use it because its activation is obviously only at sorcery speed. So, is it at sorcery speed? Remove Wish Claw, search for library, and shuffle an opponent. Okay, its activation is not actually at sorcery speed, but obviously your opponent gets it tapped, so they can't do anything with it. But this Brooding Saurion gets it back. Interesting little twist. I don't know that it's necessarily worth a sideboard slot, especially as a 4-mana 4/4. I think I might rather have the copy of IA or whatever it is to kind of have a win con. But, as far as this deck's strengths and weaknesses, Obviously, it doesn't care about a lot of what the format does. It's primarily a turn 4 deck, so it kind of checks off all the boxes to being modern playable. The downside is it's an all-in combo deck. It doesn't really have any much interaction for the opponent other than a couple of balance spells, and obviously sometimes you can use Dream Grip or Twiddle to potentially tap your opponent's thing down, buy yourself a little bit of time. But overall, you're very much a one-trick pony. You're vulnerable to graveyard hate. You're vulnerable to things like Leyline of Sanctity, as most of your win con is obviously Grape Shot. You're vulnerable to things like Alpine Moon, Blood Moon. Basically, you have the nasty thing of being hit by graveyard hate, being hit by non-targeted LD, or like Blood Moon, Alpine Moon, that kind of stuff. Damping Sphere. Obviously, it's very much a solitaire game, so it's going to also annoy opponents sometimes because they have to sit through 4 or 5, 6 minutes of game actions while you're tapping, untapping your lands. It's a deck that requires you to find A plus B combo. You have to find your Lotus Field. You have to find a certain amount of Twiddle effects. You have to find your Underworld Breach. So you have to do like all these different things, all these different moving pieces. Now, obviously, you're basically playing a 52 or 53 card deck, so it's a little bit easier to do these kind of things. But it's very much a solitaire deck. If you like playing solitaire, the Magic the Gathering, this can certainly be the deck for you. Obviously, you have other cards that can be problematic. Things like Eidolon of the Great Revel, Thalia, Archon of Emeria, Deafening Silence, etc. can all be annoying. Discard spells can be a little bit rough in some spots. Counter spells, middling effectiveness. Obviously, if they hit an Underworld Breach or a Wish, can get a little bit difficult for you. But much like a deck like Ad Nauseam Tendrils or something in Legacy, you can learn to fight through counter spells to a certain degree. And you do obviously have some protection spells with Spell Pierce, Pact of Negations, etc. Obviously, you can't use Pact of Negation until the turn you're killing your opponent, but it is a way to protect your thing. And if you wanted to go green, I know there used to be some builds that would run like Sylvan Scrag. You could also potentially run something like Veil of Summer to protect your thing. But you don't want to stretch your mana base too much. But you do have other options if you don't want to splash into the black for those particular spells. You do have access to Sylvan Scrying. But I do think the black tutors are a little bit better in terms of Profane Tutor, Diabolic Tutor, Wishclaw Talisman, access to Wish, etc. So overall, interesting deck. Not something you see a lot of, but it is something that's been putting up a few results here or there lately. And it's honestly been putting up more results than traditional Storm, which is kind of weird. But it is a deck that can be difficult to interact with if you don't have specifically hard graveyard hate with something like Leyline of the Void, Rest in Peace, that kind of stuff. Or, something like Blood Moon, Alpine Moon, those kind of things, which obviously have overlap in some other matchups, but aren't seeing necessarily as much play, obviously, except for Blood Moon. But, you can always bounce it with a Void Snare, or, Eye of the Moon, the Echoing Truth, etc. So this is a deck you should be aware of. Not a deck you should see a lot of in the format, but someone at your local game store might play it. And this is kind of a short guide of how the deck operates. So, as always, this has been John for MTG Nexus. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know what deck you would like to see us overview next.